My name is Jo Palmer and I am the founder and managing director of Pointer Remote. We are a company that is passionate about supporting businesses and individuals from all over Australia, particularly in rural areas, to leverage remote work. We support businesses to grow their team and individuals to re-enter the workforce or to upskill in remote. We also work with communities themselves to support them to attract and retain population and to increase economic development in their area. Today, I'm joined by Laurel Farrer, and it would be an understatement to say that I'm not like a massive fangirl. So,
Likewise, Jo. Likewise.
so Laurel, actually, do you know what? You do your spiel. You introduce yourself. You tell us where you are, where you're based, what you do, why I fangirl over you. I can't actually even remember where we first met, but still, like, let's hear the story.
The formal, yeah, the real. So the formal version is that I am the CEO of Distribute Consulting and the founder of the Remote Work Association. And overall, I'm just a big remote work nerd. I write for Forbes about remote work. I help advise companies and governments on how to optimize and leverage virtual workforces to create impact, both internally in the organization as well as externally for socioeconomic. So yeah, I'm just as deep into remote work as I possibly can. But the formal, or I should say informal Jo version is that, yeah, we're just remote work nerds together. We just see the opportunity and the potential that remote work can have on the world. And that just drives so much passion for both of us. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. So we don't really have a topic for you. Normally we try and theme these things to topics, but look, you, like you said, you write for Forbes. You lots of people who had been sort of in the remote workspace pre-COVID were very aware of you. You're like the remote queen, the D-grade celebrity. But no, tell me, I saw you'd written something on LinkedIn the other day. Tell me what have you you've had a few people coin new names for you. What were they? What was the titles that you were
Oh my
getting?
gosh. I'm not sure if I should be proud or embarrassed, but yeah, there was like this onslaught of, oh, you're the remote work mom and the queen of remote and Mrs. Remote. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad. I mean, I'm honored, but I also think like, does that mean that we really just don't have that many thought leaders in remote work? Like we need some more diversity because there's a lot of male thought leaders in the space of remote work. I think there's only a couple of us women, and so it's like, oh, here's one.
Here's one.
Showcase her.
Here's a crown, and we'll just put you on this little throne over here.
Like, thank you, but we can do better.
Funny. So tell me, what's your background or your training or your actual work background, and then how did that evolve into this space? Because I'm assuming you didn't graduate from college or high school and sort of launch straight into nerding out around this.
Yeah, there's not quite there wasn't a degree for virtual organizational development. There still isn't, but we're working on it. So yeah, so I come from operations management. I've always been a COO, and I think that that's why I am who I am, is because I really understand how to build a virtual organization, which most people that were in the space, and I guess like, other thought leaders, they're trying to build products for remote work, but very, very few people actually understand what it takes to build a virtual team, both culturally as well as legally as well as operationally. They just don't understand that. And so when I was able to open my mouth and speak about, yeah, this is how you design a workflow, this is how you write a handbook, this is how you schedule a meeting, and then that was kind of a different and much needed voice back in the day when these circles were so small. So yeah, I've been remote myself for 15 years. I started managing a hybrid team, took a company remote for the first time almost 13 years ago, and then have always just made it a priority in my career. I don't think that I ever really necessarily thought that working from home was a really, really, really high priority. I never went remote for the first time with that being the goal. It was just, yeah, this makes sense. And it gives us more flexibility as a team. And as an operations manager, it was always my job to watch the bottom line. And so I was like, yeah, that saves us a ton on real estate and increases our productivity costs. Like, let's do it. And then as I was recruited for another job, it was something that made me stand out. And they were like, cool, you can do that for us. And it just kind of evolved naturally until about 5 years ago, when I realized how rare and valuable that knowledge was of how to build virtual organizations. And so that's when I just started distribute consulting and started, doing this for other companies, and, definitely had to make my own market. Like, if I said I was a remote work consultant, nobody had any idea what that meant. It was not an industry, let alone a job category. And so it was a lot of scrappiness in the beginning. But as you can imagine, it's been a very different scenario for the past year. So we're really honored to be helping some of the world's largest and most influential organizations understand how to do this at scale.
Mm. So it must be kind of like a bit of a warm and fuzzy when you see like connections come through on LinkedIn that their job title is like head of remote, or like transformation, remote transformation, and all of these things, because it's become mainstream. Like it's something that has to be worked through, and doesn't, as we've all established, when it happens quick and fast and dirty, it's not great, and you get people that are burned by the whole sort of scenario. But I think that, like, that's a really interesting point, that that you've come at it from that operations side, rather than building a product to sort of hack doing remote. That's really interesting.
I think that's why I am who I am too, is that I'm neutral. I'm the only one out there that's neutral. I'm not trying to push anything. I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just trying to network and like get to know like what's going on in the industry, so that I can keep temperature of that and pass along to my clients. And so people feel more safe sharing information or building a partnership with me, because I don't have, an ulterior motive. And so it's really, networking is absolutely why my career and business are where they are, is because I've just been able to meet so many different people and collaborate with them. But yeah, that head of remote role, I don't know. I wish it was warm and fuzzy. I do definitely get excited the fact that there is so much attention and there is so much support and awareness of virtual operations. That is exciting to me. And never could I have imagined a world in which, virtual operations were a kitchen table conversation. Like,
Yeah.
that's crazy. But most of the time, when I see that role, there's just kind of the sense of dread that, oh dear, you have no idea what you're doing.
That's really interesting. Well, I suppose, and that's a really interesting thing, because you, like you said, you touched on, like, there's no degree, there's no sort of like
Right.
formal training that you can go and do. Like, who takes a head of remote role? Is it someone that's just sort of done it for a bit, or is it someone that just pores over your Forbes articles and that's created their job description?
Self-taught. Yeah, I don't know. I will say that there's a lot of mistakes being made. So again, we're kind of privy to some closed door conversations, and we can see that some of these really large organizations are getting really, really caught up in specific job requirements. Like, I just saw one of the world's most brilliant minds of virtual operations get passed over a job because they were like, oh, you don't have SaaS experience, like with a software company. And she was like, I mean, she's worked for Fortune 500 companies. She is a pioneer in virtual operations. And they were like, oh, I don't know, thinking that like, oh, a head of remote is kind of a dime a dozen. And it's like, no, they have no idea that there are literally only a handful of people in the world that have high level experience in this. And so it's a really strange market. There's also other companies, again, big unicorns and large companies that are saying, oh, yeah, we hired the best of the best. And I asked them point blank, like, have they been working remotely longer than the pandemic? And they said, well, no. Has anybody? And I'm like, good luck. Have fun. Call me in a few months when your company's gone down the toilet.
Oh, how
Yeah,
funny.
so
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. I sort of maybe I've been getting really excited because I'm like, oh great, this is happening. I really, and shame on me for sort of not thinking about it to that level of I think that I very much have been caught up in the fact of like, oh my God, this is mainstream, like it's happening,
it
people are doing
is.
this and stuff. But also very aware of the some, I don't know, the jumping in and sort of we'll just see how it goes. And look, for a lot of businesses, especially smaller businesses, that's just what's had to have happened. Like you had to just dive in and it's survival of the fittest. Like you've got to just sort of to give it a go, especially in countries like like here in Australia, we've had some challenging times with, especially for Victorians, they've had some pretty serious second round of lockdowns here. But on a global scale, we've done very well as far as the pandemic wise, but still the impact that it's had on how people are doing business here, um, I think has been enough that it will carry on in some way, shape, or form. Like, look, there's lots of
Mhm.
organizations that are like, okay, back to the office, let's go. What do you think I'd love to hear your take on that. I've got my standard response to that when people ask me about what do you think, like those that have sort of almost forgotten that flash in the pan that was work from home or work remotely,
Mhm.
work from anywhere. What's your sort of response to people when they ask around what does this look like moving forward?
Yeah, well, just like you're saying, the longer that the lockdowns last, the higher the rates of adoption of remote work increase. And so, in areas like here in the United States, where people have been on lockdown for a full year, the adoption rates are very, very high because the leadership is backed into the corner of saying, well, obviously we can do this sustainably because we are doing this sustainably.
Yeah.
So let's just do it a little bit better and put some intention behind it. So yes, it is absolutely here to stay as part of mainstream business. The statistics in developed countries point to about 40% adoption. So 40% of the workforce will continue to work remotely at least twice a week, uh, post COVID. And so they will be remote as a default.
Yeah.
40%, which is an astronomical number considering that at the beginning of 2020, that number was 3% at best. So it's been a crazy, crazy increase. But it doesn't necessarily mean that every single company is now going completely officeless. A lot of people are interpreting that in the media because a lot of big giants are, making announcements about you can permanently work from home. That's not the case at all. Hybrid is absolutely the new normal, that people will have more flexibility between when they go to the office and when they work from home, but there will still be an HQ office, there will still be a home office. It's just enabling more flexibility.
Mm.
That's the big difference. So yeah, that's what we will see become the new normal. And then that 40% of workforce will then kind of create a domino effect and higher adoption rates because the other companies that haven't been able to or haven't wanted to adopt remote work permanently, they will then be competing with talent and
Yeah.
or for talent, and they won't be able to. So they'll see that their competitors are offering flexibility and they will be forced to do the same.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Okay, good. We're on the same playing field for that one.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, good. Tick. So funny. I think that it's really interesting that concept of where previously that flexibility, that remote work thing was held either as a carrot or as a bonus or as that you took a hit pay wise to do that. And I
Mhm.
love that that's been flipped on its head now, that where it's pretty much like innovate or die. Like if you can probably get away with the next sort of 12 to 18 months holding on to your talent, um if you're not offering the flexibility or you've like enforced to going back full time to the office. But yeah, I reckon it's going to be around that 18 months mark when things sort of might become a bit more stable as far as like global economies or national economies and things like that, that
Mhm.
people feel confident enough to resign and be like, you know what, I'm going to the competitor because look at the working conditions
Yeah,
are just
absolutely.
they suit me more. I
Yeah.
have a question on that concept of like I listen to you and you regularly refer to the work from home. We've sort of tried to start switching to the work from anywhere, just, and I know that it's like semantics, but I feel I feel that when we are talking about that work from anywhere thing, that it conjures up a different sort of view in people's mind as that from work from home. And I think in the past, like, people assumed work from home was in your Ugg boots and your track pants, like that was that sort of lazy work that from
Mhm.
the waist down, that it was like very cash down there. Um, to the whole world sort of getting to experience it and know that there is sort of that's not the case. But I feel like there's an element, because of most of the world's experience with remote work for the first time was in a pandemic and in a really sort of frightening global situation, plus with a spouse at home, plus with kids at home, and trying to do all of the things, which was quite gross. um, and I wonder if, and this is just a question putting it out there to you, is that do you think that because for a lot of people that was their experience with work from home, that the actual terminology around it moving forward, it matters? Like, do you think
Mhm.
that referring to it matters?
So this is a multi-part question and answer, because what we need to first remember is that the remote work industry as a whole, as a community, was, I don't even know if we can say it was in infancy. I mean, it was a fetus, like it was brand new. Yes, teleworking and telecommuting had existed for a few decades, but that's still brand new. And especially work from anywhere, like digital nomadism and just, a mobility, workplace mobility. That was a brand new concept that for maybe the past 10 years, due to the ability of technology. And what 10 years ago, Wi-Fi connections were just starting in countries, so it's a brand new concept in general. So we as a community were still in that place of infancy, of incubating ideas of like, what words are we going to use?
Mm,
Are we distributed? Are we remote? Are we officeless? Are we virtual? Like, we were still exploring words and getting tools developed, and new product ideas couldn't get funded because they didn't think that we were real businesses. Like, this was so young and so small less than a year ago.
mm,
And now it's mainstream. And so people really are hungry for, like, okay, what words, what does this mean? And what does this mean? And what product do I use for this? And, I need this to be able to be successful and functional. And it's like, yeah, like we had plans for that in 10 years. We were going to develop that in 10 years when our industry grew to that point. But we thought it was going to take 10 years. So what really happened in March and February of 2020 is that the industry as a whole developed and hypergrowth by a decade in the span of
mm,
2 weeks. So a lot of the basic infrastructure just doesn't exist yet, like products and ideas and events and support systems. They just don't exist yet. There's a lot of catching up to do. So yes, a lot of people are wondering about the terms. It's like, we don't know. Like, it's just kind of going to land where it's going to land. But it is important that we do use that terminology openly to reflect, what the state is in our organization. So it's more than articulating and agreeing on a definition socially. It's more important to agree to a definition internally as an organization, to say, all right, you are allowed to work from anywhere versus you are allowed to work from home. Those are two different things. And not only are they two different things as a term, they're more importantly two different things per organization. So what work from home means for one company culture can mean something very, very different for another company culture. So it's really important that we each develop a remote work policy that articulates what does remote work look like at our organization? And does everybody agree to the terms? The employers, the administration, the managers, the workforce, does everybody agree to what it's going to take to make this work?
Mm.
That's really important. And frankly, that's what is not happening now. What's happening now, like you said, it's not remote work. This is an international contingency plan for a global pandemic. Like, this is not remote work. This is us surviving as a global community. What should happen long term is coming into virtual organizational development with much more intention, much more planning, much more infrastructure, much more training. And that is what will make remote work sustainable, not just a workplace change like it is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think one other thing that, like what you said, that it's a case by case for organizations, but it's also um, insurance companies and insurance policies are going to really impact that as well, because I just sort of think about, for an organization whose duty of care, and I assume it's different from around the world as well, but the duty of care that you have for your employees when they are at work, regardless of where that is, you can have some sort of impact or influence over their working conditions if they're working from home, a home office, or a
Mhm.
co-working space, office or hot desk, or at least the same spot. But that digital nomad and that on the move, or the working in the cafe and things, like, it's just this other whole Pandora's box as far as insurance. Like, if you fall over at work on the stairs in the office, well, in
Mhm.
Australia, there's work cover, there is government legislated things that
Yeah, the workers'
determine the
compensation. Yeah.
responsibility and the care. But when you do that in a cafe, but you're at work, you've slipped on your latte, like, are
Mhm.
you like, and all of this, and I think that that's where, like you said, the growing pains that come with this not being remote work. This is this is survival mode. I think this is going to be a really interesting time, and it's going to be, I think, a bit scary how much um, accidents and lawsuits will then govern legislation. And I can see why businesses are saying, come back. It's like the safe space. Come back to home base. We know how the
Right.
rules
We're
work
equipped for
here. Like,
this.
come back.
Yeah.
But I think that doing that for a finite amount of time in order to put in what new looks like, and that hybrid thing, I think you're really right there, that's probably hitting the nail on the head with where this goes moving forward.
Mhm.
I want to sort of shift gear slightly, because as an avid reader of your content online, and I gobble up new Laurel articles as they come on. If you haven't, like, I will put links to in all of this, but to your website and stuff. You very kindly have got the most amazing library of all of your stuff forever in there, which is really good. So, and actually, do you know what's quite funny? We were having a look back through some of your archives, and it was interesting, just sort of even seeing how you have evolved over the time
Yeah.
as well, like with your views on things, and how other things influencing the industry have sort of influenced your writing. Anyway, that's a side thing there. But
Yeah.
I think, well, my first sort of question is that, have you got any tips or suggestions, or things, so for the employee that has been hunted back to the office full time after proving for 12 months that they can do a fabulous job and they're hitting their KPIs and doing all of the things um, from anywhere. And they've been brought back into the office, because we're starting to see that a lot in Australia, and it's causing a bit of resistance.
Mhm.
Um, any tips for sort of trying to, I suppose, manage up and sort of start trying to drive that change, because that generally has to come from the head of the organization. Like, how can people sort of be influencing that from the employee up?
Mhm. Yeah, so this kind of circles back to your work from home, work from anywhere conversation about how the goal of true remote work advocates is not necessarily that we want people to be in home offices instead of HQ offices. It's that we want location to become irrelevant, that we want people to assume more responsibility as autonomous self-managers so that they can be more productive from wherever they are, especially for knowledge workers. If you are using a computer for 80% or more of your role and your tasks, there is absolutely no need for you to go to a place, a co-located environment to be productive in your role. If it's dependent on a computer, computers are now mobile thanks to the technology that we have in this modern era, and therefore you can be as mobile as your internet connection. So what we want to do is stop saying that, the classic saying is work is something that we do, not somewhere that we go, right? And so we really are trying to help people understand that operations can be virtual, that professionals now have the ability to be location independent and to be more productive where they are. So as a professional wants to adopt and exemplify and implement that methodology in their workplace, but they have leadership that still thinks that productivity is dependent on a location, you know, frankly, we can say that the leadership's feet have kind of been kicked out from under them, because you just proved for a year that you can be productive outside of an office. And that was you pre-coronavirus. That was the big thing that we tried to get people to do, is just conduct a trial, just see if it's possible. And once they saw that it was possible, it was like, okay, well, there's your biggest excuse that's gone. So now let's try it out. Let's optimize it. So you as a professional now have this in your toolbox to say, I can be professional and I can be proactive and I can be very productive outside of the office. I just proved it. But let's think about the pros and cons of doing this long term. Now, the mistake that most people make when they're going to a manager or executive leadership with this case for change is they're talking about it very personally. They're saying, oh, it'll be better for my home life, or I'll be able to sleep in more, or I'll just feel healthier, or it's better for my mental health. Those are personal decisions. And yes, those are very, very good reasons, but that's not how decisions are made in an organization. So if you go to the organization with decision-making criteria based on how companies make decisions, like productivity costs and real estate costs and those safety and compliance regulations that we were talking about. If you start speaking that language, then it's much, much easier to have a conversation, and you can take those statistics about how your productivity was maintained or increased, or how they're going to, save a lot of money from the retention and talent attraction piece that we were talking about earlier. If you start talking in numbers and talking in the language of business, then not only can you have an easier conversation, but it'll be much easier to convince them as well.
Yeah, that's a good thing. And realistically, money talks, doesn't it? And if you can swing in, you can swing in how it improves the bottom line, and that how your outputs and things are going to be improving the company's bottom line. That's a good one. Again, switching slightly, I wanted to, because obviously we, those that sort of follow along with what we do at Pointer here in Oz, we have a really big rural focus to our remote thing, which actually talking about like the glossary of terms for remote work. When I first started the company, nearly 4 years ago, using the word remote in Australia was really confusing, and I confused a lot of people. And probably at least the first 18 months of our business running, people would approach me looking for nursing jobs in remote Indigenous communities in the outback, or they thought that this was a place to find jobs in the mining industry in the outback. Like we use the terms regional, rural and remote as a geographic thing. So that was an interesting thing, but that's been a very it's been an interesting transition for us, to people who are like, oh, I get it now, that remote work thing you were talking about. I didn't actually really ever get it before, but I get it now. But and actually, do you know what, when I think about it, I feel that this is probably how we first connected, was around a program that actually forgive me, I don't know if it's still going, but with the Utah state government, do you want to talk us a bit through with what that project was? Because I'm really interested just to talk about, it's sort of a different demographic that I deal with, that you were working with that program, but how even pre-COVID and a good few years ago, that you were doing stuff where remote work was making an impact in rural communities in the US.
Yeah, that's right. I had forgotten as well, and that is how we got connected. Yeah, so the Rural Online Initiative was a bill that was passed by the state of Utah that was wanted to use the mobility of jobs in order to stop the brain drain of rural counties in the state. And so they were trying to bring jobs to people instead of people having to move away to go find sustainable employment. So the bill was passed, and the legislators and the senators that proposed and approved the bill kind of turned around. I had reached out to them and said, hey, this is cool. Utah is actually where I was born, and so I was like, hey, this is cool. Utah and remote work, like that's me. And so it got approved, and they turned around and they said, we never thought it would pass. We have no idea what we're gonna do. And I was like, oh, well, good, because I have lots of ideas. So that was one of the first socioeconomic contracts that we had here at Distribute, and it was so amazing to see the impact on people's lives, that they didn't have to move away from an area that they loved or family and friends. They could find really good paying jobs, and the employers were thrilled because they could save a little bit of money on cost of living, but the employee was also thrilled because they were making so much more than they could locally. So
and the Utah state government's loving the fact that they're all staying there and paying tax, and
yeah, it was bipartisan. Yeah, both government branches were trying to claim ownership and saying, like, see, we did it. It was a great success. So yeah, we upskilled the local workforce to be able to understand where to find remote jobs, how to qualify for them, how to interview for them, and then we also helped businesses create jobs for local residents, because we saw incredible job acquisition rates in the participants when they were getting jobs with local businesses. And that was way higher success rates for local workers connecting to local businesses. And so we really talked to the businesses to help them understand, how can you create more flexible workplace opportunities for your local community. And it was incredible. It was so revolutionary that, it was all so innovative. It was completely uncharted territory. Now it's kind of, another one of those bittersweet effects of the hypergrowth of remote work, that now the whole world is talking about it, like, oh my gosh, we can, people are moving out of Silicon Valley and people are moving out of London. Like, this is amazing. Guess what we could do with this? And it's like, yeah, like, what a good idea. Yeah, I never would have thought about that. No.
Yeah.
So it's kind of bittersweet that it kind of seems to have grown out of itself a little bit. It's not quite like the market that we were going to build and control. But yes, we are seeing that now at scale, that companies all over the world, and in some of the most densely populated, highest growth urban areas, now have opportunities to distribute, to hire from other talent pools, to really leverage location as an asset. I just had a call with a government just yesterday that said, we have all of these locations in which we need people stationed, but nobody will go there because they're really tough climates, or tough political climates. But now we can staff those locations from people all over the world, and now we're getting the manpower that we need because we're willing to consider virtual operations. So yeah, massive socioeconomic impact of the mobility of jobs. We just need to do a better job at creating resources. Again, cities now are like, okay, well, how do I attract remote workers? And it's like, as well as I do, it's like, we were getting to that. we were working on it. We had ideas, we had plans, we were working on it. So there's a lot of catching up to do in terms of creating resources for cities and communities and workers and employers all to get aligned on this conversation about how to enable this mobility on both a national and an international scale. But it's an exciting future ahead for sure.
So good. Do you know what? I'm going to wrap it out there because that's so exciting, because I'm really excited that you're still excited that that is actually a legit thing, because I think like we've really swung our focus around on how remote work is an attraction and retention of rural population tool.
Yeah.
And it's an enabler and those sorts of things. And it makes me feel very happy to hear that you think that that still will be an outcome, because I know you see lots of statistics that there is still, cities are growing, but it's a really interesting demographic. I don't know what it's like in the US, but what we're sort of seeing is that a lot of the people pre-COVID that actually did leave the city and move to a rural area sort of came from two buckets. So there was those that were pushed out price wise because of it was just too expensive to do cities. But they rarely, I shouldn't say rarely, but they would generally maybe go to outer suburbs of the big cities. But where we found it was country people that had gone and done their 10 or 15 years in the big smoke, and then had return to the regions to do their babies and so set up businesses or do things a little bit differently, because the cost of living is more affordable and the lifestyle is different. But we are seeing in Australia this mass exodus of the cities. It is so crazy. Like,
that's happening globally.
Yeah.
That's everywhere.
Yeah. And towns and communities that are especially within that sort of 2-hour drive of a CBD of like major cities, there's whole towns where you literally cannot buy a house. Like, they have sold out. And yeah, it's really interesting though that the sort of feel of the town is changing as well. So you've then got your cafes that are popping up that maybe weren't there before, and those sorts of things. So I think it will be a push and pull thing for a little bit as well, though, that like, oh, but hang on, like, yeah, it's great to have you here and spending money in our shops, but whoa, it's really
it's going to shift.
Yeah.
Well, and likewise too of the people that are moving out. So I'm rural as well, and we had a bunch of people. We live about an hour and a half, 2 hours out of both Boston and New York, and so we are a very hot spot of rural. You know, you get the farmhouse, but you still get access to the cities. And the city people were coming and saying, "Wait a second. You know, you have a well?" Oh, never mind. And they were, so yeah, there's going to be culture shock on both ends. But it is so funny to see this happening at scale, because again, a year ago we were sitting in back rooms trying to scheme and conducting all of this market research about how in the world do we convince people to move rural, and thinking that we were kind of twisting their arms. So there was employer incentives, and there was big municipal incentives of, we'll pay you $10,000 to move to our city. There was so much strategy that was going into the idea behind how do we really minimize the rural divide. And turns out people wanted it anyway. Like, they didn't need an incentive. They just needed permission. They needed to be enabled to move rural. They want to move rural. So it's just a matter of, can I live a comfortable lifestyle, have sustainable employment? And if so, then there's a lot of different places that I would like to live. I don't necessarily live in an urban environment because I want to. It's because I have to. So yeah, there's a really interesting shift happening, and it has been amazing to see that happen. Again, internationally, all over the world, people are just fleeing cities and really balancing wealth distribution on an international scale. It's easy and so exciting.
So exciting. Okay. Thanks, Laurel. I'll put all the links to all of the bits and pieces where people can find you. We also don't do texts to Laurel if you don't respond, if she doesn't respond to your email in a apparently fast enough time. Don't harass her.
It's not my fault.
Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.